Hi, folks. Welcome, everyone, to the homelessness prevention system training today. We are super excited for today's session, and I'm going to actually get us going right away since we have a ton of ground to cover. We're hoping to leave as much time as we can for all of your questions on the topics that we want to cover today. So I'm going to kick us right off with introductions. We are hosting this training today, and my name is Sasha, and I work at Homebase, and we have my colleagues Sarah and Carla that are hosting the training today, but we've also partnered with a lot of great folks from various community partners that we are going to be introducing as different topics come up and as we cover our agenda. So with that, we wanted to start with a couple introductions. So we're going to ask y'all to use the chat, and I'll go over the Zoom logistics real fast since hopefully everyone's pretty comfortable over the past 3 years getting to know Zoom, but we're hoping that you would share with us via the chat your name, your preferred pronouns, your organization, and if there's something that you are proud of, whether it's work or non-work related, looking back on 2022. So I'm going to post those in the chat as well. So I'll kick us off. My name is Sasha Kane. My pronouns are she, they. I work at Homebase, and something that I'm proud of looking back on 2022 is my new nephew and my brother and sister-in-law had their first baby, and it's been really exciting to have a growing family and to see them as parents. So I'm gonna go over the Zoom tips and still welcome folks to share your name and your pronouns, your org in the chat. I'm hoping maybe Carla or Sarah, if you can repost those prompts if there's a lot of new folks coming in, because I know they can't see the chat. So a couple Zoom logistics before we dive in. Everyone was automatically placed on mute when you joined the training, but you are most welcome to unmute yourself from the bar at the bottom to bring your voice to the meeting. We're going to have opportunities for questions and for chat today. If you're more comfortable, you're also most welcome to use the chat, as some of you are already doing for intros. You can also rename yourself if you need to through the participant menu. And I'm going to turn on closed captions. Looks like they're on. So you should be able to. Sorry, Carla, can you confirm that they're on?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to turn them on. So let me see.
All right, closed captions are on, so you should be able to access those at the bottom as well. So a couple tips, we would love to see your faces. If you are able to today, please do turn on your video. And if you have any technical difficulties today, please message either me or Carla or Sarah today, or email our team email at santaclaracoc@homebase.org. So in terms of what we're hoping to cover today, we're really going to dig into the history and the role of the homelessness prevention system. We're going to talk about the study that was where this system originated as a pilot and the role of the prevention system and the community plan to end homelessness. We'll also spend some time reflecting on the philosophy and celebrating the impact of the homelessness prevention system, the incredible community impacts that y'all's work has had in the community We're also going to touch on various resources that are available to folks experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So I know that we've heard that folks have questions about what else is out there in the supportive housing system. What other types of programs can we connect folks to? So we'll definitely talk about that. And we're going to spend a good chunk of time, hopefully a little over half of today's meeting, digging into challenges and emerging solutions and strategies to support folks with different lived experiences and cultural backgrounds. So we've got some panelists on this front, we've got some slides, and we're going to have a lot of time for questions as well. So just a quick preview of next week before we dive into the material. Next week, we're gonna be back, same time, same place, and we're gonna have a panel of community partners to talk specifically about case management and to dig into what does it look like to provide voluntary services, and what are some of the challenges around engaging folks in services? How do we address those? How do we tailor case management to the unique client strengths and to address their unique barriers, and also how what are some person-centered strategies for supporting folks to achieve their housing stability goals. Next week, in addition to the panel, we'll have some group discussion and problem solving, some hypotheticals as well. So we hope you'll join us then one more time. So we are at this point going to dig into the homelessness prevention system's role in the community plan and a little bit of historical context. So right now I'm going to pass it to Jessica Orozco at the County Office of Supportive Housing to chat about that.
Thank you, Sasha, and good afternoon to everyone. It's very exciting to see you all here and to get to discuss the prevention system. So we wanted to start by kind of giving a general overview of what the prevention system is, how it got started, and some of the strategies or reasons for which it was structured in the way that it was structured. So as you guys can imagine, homelessness prevention strategies obviously have a potential to reduce homelessness and make some cost savings within the community so that we can assist a family or individual who unfortunately has been pushed into homelessness. And as you guys can imagine, we're seeing an increase in homelessness within our community. So the need for us to basically improve and expand our homelessness prevention system is very, very needed. And so that focus has never been more important than it is today. And just to give kind of a general idea, in Santa Clara County, for every 2 homeless individuals that get connected to housing, 3 more individuals are experiencing homelessness for the very first time. And so again, the need is much higher than we have the resources. And so it makes it that much more important that we invest in our homelessness prevention service in order to assist those that are already homeless, and more importantly, prevent others from experiencing this trauma. And so for those reasons and some strategic reasons that we'll discuss in the future, our existing homelessness prevention system brings together a network of over 20 partners. We target, of course, support to families, individuals who are most at risk of losing their housing. It provides flexibility in all areas, including financial assistance and case management. And it prevents participants, of course, from entering our supportive housing system. Next slide, please. And so our homelessness prevention system, as it stands right now, with Sacred Heart being our lead agency, really began in 2017, in July of 2017, where we launched this pilot program, and it is coordinated and implemented by Destination Home and Sacred Heart, and really was originally in its foundation very similar to our Emergency Assistance Network agency. So far since 2017, this system has expanded, and they've implemented or deployed over $46 million to assistance throughout the community. Of course, the pandemic had other impacts, and so that's something that's impacting our system as it stands right now, but we'll go ahead and go into that into a little bit more detail later. Next slide. And so also one of the things that that Destination Home was able to do is back in 2015, they commissioned a study to really understand what is the cost of homelessness. And within this study, it was found obviously that there is a huge cost savings, not to mention, of course, reduced trauma impact to households when we do not allow them to enter the supportive housing system or become homeless. And so throughout this study, what it was learned, it was a 6-year study, and Santa Clara County spent over $520 million providing services for homeless residents. As you guys can imagine, the higher costs came from the healthcare system as well as the justice system. And so the study really allowed us to understand the true impacts financially in our system, and how if we were able to create a system that basically prevents homelessness and saves us resources and costs, then those resources and costs can be put into other needs to be able to meet the need. And so all of this information was done, if you guys remember, and you've been in this line of work for a while, in the Housing 1000 campaign, the estimate average per housing cost, public cost, was over $62,000, meaning every individual who found themselves homeless and used public resources, it cost about $62,000. At the same time, for the Housing 1000 campaign, for those that we were housing, the average cost for housing, and this included individuals who had been chronically homeless and potentially with a disabling condition, the cost was actually $19,000. So that's over $40,000 in savings per year per client, which we could clearly deploy into other systems, which again leads us to the prevention system. So if we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. Another component of what has been taken into consideration and implemented for the homelessness prevention system is also a study that Destination Home started working on in 2019. And it was to really understand how race and homelessness intersect in our community. And so this effort resulted in a report. It's called Race and Homelessness in Santa Clara County. If you guys haven't taken a look at that, I highly recommend it. It's something that has truly shaped our system and informed our system. So overall, our county is very similar to other communities in the US, with high rates of homelessness among people of color. And the disparities are particularly prevalent among Black or African American, American Indian, Alaska Native, and Hispanic or Latinx communities. And in contrast, non-Hispanic people and those who identify as Asian Americans are both significantly underrepresented in the homelessness population. The analysis also found that racial and ethnic disparities for some of the data sets that we have in HMIS related to a person's homelessness experiences. So that also informed our system today, not just prevention, but our supportive housing system. And then finally, the third thing that we wanted to highlight that came about from the study was that there are structural barriers. For example, lack of affordable housing and economic opportunity. Lack of affordable housing is something that our community is definitely experiencing, as you guys know, and we have a very small rental market. And so between a lack of affordable housing, the need for more living wages, in addition to a tight rental market, leads to a lot of need across our community. Next slide. Thank you. And then basically after the studies that we've talked about, every 5 years, we put together a community plan to end homelessness. And that's pretty much with the input of over 8,000 individuals that are within our community, including folks with lived experience. We set out to set really high goals from 2020 through 2025. And we put these into strategies. And so strategy 1 is really to address the root causes of homelessness through system change and policy change. Our second strategy is to expand homelessness prevention and housing to meet the need. And then strategy 3 is to improve the quality of life for unsheltered individuals and create healthy neighborhoods for all. So for folks that are unable to go into housing and do need to have some type of like emergency shelter for a while, for example, we want to make sure that that experience creates healthy neighborhoods, and it is as positive as an experience as it can be for individuals that experience that. Next slide. Thank you. And so within our community plan to end homelessness, again, if you guys haven't taken a look at it, I recommend that you do, because most things that are being done in the community is really revolving and connected to these 3 strategies. And within these 3 strategies, we set out some very hefty targets. Our goals are really that by 2025, we would achieve a 30% reduction in the inflow of people becoming homeless, that we would house 20,000 people through our supportive housing system. That means rapid rehousing, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing. That we would double the availability of temporary housing and shelters capacities. And then, of course, address the racial inequities that are present throughout our system. Next slide. So far, we have made significant progress towards our goals set out in the community plan. I will say that COVID presented some different strategies, but also some different resources that actually allowed us to get closer and closer to our goals. But specifically, what I do want to highlight is that our homelessness prevention system goal from 2020 through 2025 was to expand our system and allow the system to serve 2,500 households per year, which, if you consider that we started at like 400 households, it's a very hefty goal. But so far we've made progress. 65% is what we've done so far in our goal. And that's really thanks to our system lead, Sacred Heart, and all of the partner agencies that do the very difficult work of working with families who are experiencing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And we wanted to zoom out just a little bit here to talk about the rest of the supportive housing system and kind of do a quick primer on the different types of programs that are available. So this graphic really recognizes that homelessness and housing are at the intersection of a large number of vital community needs. So the supportive housing system has been really intentionally designed around a collaboration between many partners, including yourselves and developers, local cities, philanthropic funders, community organizations, and community members who all work together to collectively towards the goal of ending homelessness. So in addition to homelessness prevention, housing development partners play a critical role in increasing the supply of housing. And you'll see in this part of the graphic, there are highlighted partners that are working to connect folks to various housing programs available. So there are outreach teams that engage with unhoused folks. They connect them to the coordinated entry system, and they connect them to shelter opportunities. And they help locate folks that are unhoused that have been referred through coordinated entry to the housing programs that they've been referred to. There's the coordinated entry system, which we are going to talk about in a little bit more detail in a few slides. But coordinated entry, in a nutshell, is the centralized process by which Santa Clara County connects folks experiencing homelessness to the broad portfolio of housing programs that are available. So it's a standardized process, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. As part of that, there is the Here For You call center, which was launched this year. And the call center is the centralized access point. It's the way that folks access emergency shelter. So clients can call the Here For You Center that coordinates all available shelter beds. All of the there's some exceptions, but almost all shelters notify the Here For You call center when they have openings, and the call center then connects folks to those openings. And the call center also provides housing problem solving. So they have creative conversations to identify solutions outside of emergency shelter and transitional housing. They help folks tap into their networks and other potential resources to resolve their homelessness as well. So in terms of the types of temporary and permanent housing programs that are available through the Here For You call center and the coordinated entry system, that includes these 5 different categories of programs right here. So there are emergency shelters that the Here For You call center connects folks to. So just to provide a safe place for folks to sleep that are unhoused, to meet some of those basic needs, and connect folks to the coordinated entry system. And then the coordinated entry system is the one that connects folks to transitional, rapid, and permanent supportive housing. And we'll get into that referral process in just a little bit and give you a sense of who does get referred, what are the rates of referral, what does the assessment look like. But the types of housing programs that are available are transitional housing, which provides a pretty structured living environment, typically up to 2 years with supportive services. There's also rapid rehousing that's up to 2 years of rental assistance with some lighter touch supportive services. It's typically focused on getting folks quickly housed and increasing their income so that they can remain housed independently after the 6-month to 2-year subsidy runs out. And then finally, there's permanent supportive housing, and this is typically geared towards folks that have disabilities and that have long histories of homelessness. So 1 to 3 years at least of history of homelessness typically. So this is the higher intensity supports typically, and long-term rental subsidies and connections to mental and behavioral health care. So that is the 100,000-foot overview of the supportive housing system. And I know folks are curious about how to connect people to transitional, rapid, and permanent supportive housing. So we are going to talk about the coordinated entry system in a little more depth in just a bit. But at this point, I would like to pass it off to Chad Bojorquez, who's joining us from Destination Home, to chat a little bit about who are the participants in homelessness prevention, what is the process, and highlight some of the incredible work that y'all have been doing and its impact in the community.
Thank you, Sasha and Jessica before that. And welcome everybody. Reading through the chat, it makes me want to ask a bunch of follow-up questions about people's accomplishments, so I'm trying not to do that. So I'll dive in a little bit deeper. As mentioned before, Destination Home has been kind of the backbone convener of the homelessness prevention system since 2017. And really what that has meant is kind of pooling together public and private funding and working very closely with Sacred Heart Community Service and the other 18 partners to make this program work. So just dive in a little bit about who we see in the program and the success that we've had so far. So this is kind of a synopsis of what we've seen over 5 years in the homelessness prevention system. The majority of families have minor children in the household. We see a large percentage of households with a disabling condition. That's something that we are kind of turning our sights on in this coming year and trying to figure out if we can be more intentional about which partners that we might bring into the network and what strategies to use to address it. And also that 87% of our participants are extremely low income. And interestingly, the exact same percentage of our households are considered households of color. So there's a strong correlation between poverty and people of color. Unfortunately, it's something that we all know, but our intention is to kind of work directly at that and design our programs to serve the most vulnerable people in the community. And so by serving and prioritizing extremely low income households, we're also prioritizing households of color. Next slide, please. Here's what you see. Kind of, we ask participants when they are enrolled, what are their reasons for seeking assistance? Vast majority are related to income or income loss, not surprisingly. But we have a lot of other primary reasons why people are accessing the homelessness prevention system, including changes to family composition, which can include someone being deported, for example, medical and other unexpected expenses. And then we have a pretty consistent category around people who are either actively fleeing or have recently experienced domestic violence or human trafficking. And so we learned that really early on and actually proactively sought partnership with the 5 organizations that are part of the Domestic Violence Advocacy Consortium. And so they are part of our network of assistance providers, so that when somebody comes in or household comes in and they're dealing with that kind of situation, we can make sure that they have the specialized support that's needed if they want. Next slide, please. Also, a couple of years in, and we kind of knew what we were working with and wanted to have kind of a true north kind of baseline for our philosophy around providing homelessness prevention services. We went through a pretty intense strategic planning process with all of the partners and kind of came up with these priorities. And I think that it's important to highlight that we have this really large, growing, vast, diverse network of partners all across the county, large organizations, super small organizations, and then, geographically spread and different specializations. But one of the ways that we feel like we have stayed successful is by having a constant look at remaining consistent across the board, meaning we hope our goal is that no matter which of the 19 doors that you go to as a potential client, that you're going to receive the same type of kind of culturally competent, flexible, quick services. And so in order to do that, we kind of have like a baseline philosophy here. And it's really important to us that while we've served, and I think there's some numbers probably coming up, but we've served nearly 5,000 households at this point over the 5 years, that each household is being served individually and that we're catering our services to that household and what they need. And that we're doing things quickly and customized, and flexibility is a huge theme in our program. Our funding can pay for rental assistance, kind of a more traditional need that is by and large the biggest need. But we also can pay for all kinds of other things, and in some cases can provide financial assistance directly to the household. So we try to maintain flexibility in our guidelines and in our ability for eligibility and ability to serve the household's needs and what's actually going on in people's lives. And we continue to prioritize the most vulnerable, and that is very consistent with the supportive housing system in Santa Clara County at large. And it's important to note too, it's kind of like the theme of the day. While the homelessness prevention system has 19 partners, we have the capacity to serve over 1,600 households a year. We're only serving, at last count, 28% of the households that come to us that seek assistance. So we're literally barely scratching the surface in some regards for the need that's out there. And so in order to kind of create equity and fairness across the board, we serve the most vulnerable households first. Next slide first, please. Excuse me. This is a very beautiful, complicated slide about system workflow that I won't pretend to go into the details. I'll wait for Aaron's part later, but the overall goal is that we do a very brief pre-screening. In fact, we started out with a pretty lengthy, kind of similar to the regular VI-SPDAT. It was called the prevention VI-SPDAT assessment that we used to see if folks would qualify. And during the pandemic, one of our silver linings is we kind of took advantage of the fast tracking of different rules and guidelines and changes, and created an assessment that is vastly shorter. I believe it's about 10 minutes on average. We call it the HPAT. It's kind of a modified version of the prevention VI-SPDAT, and that helps people get screened and really know whether they're going to be eligible much quicker and less burden on both the provider and the client. Then we enroll, and they're connected to an available partner that has, case management capacity, complete the enrollment, and typically address some kind of emergency financial need, right? That's usually what's the most important thing. I owe them the last month and a half worth of rent, or I had to, I paid rent, but I can't get to work because I have this car bill, whatever it might be. And then we work with the household again on an individual basis, typically over kind of a 3 to 6 month on average period of time. It's extended during COVID. It used to be 3 to 4 months, but families are staying enrolled for longer. There are less options. The inflation is up. Financial situation for families who are in extremely low income households are harder to get out of. And then I think something that's unique and kind of important for us is that there does typically come a time where a household will, exit, so to speak, and no longer be enrolled. But we do stay in touch with families and both look in our homeless management information system, HMIS database system, as well as proactively call households and find out how they're doing. Has anything new come up? And we are in limited circumstances able to re-enroll households because, again, households who are in such dire financial situations are like literally one other hiccup or unexpected event away from needing assistance again. And kind of when we set out to do this, we wanted to really wrap around and do whatever it took to prevent homelessness and get away from the kind of the one-time assistance. Sorry, we already helped you, once in a lifetime type of assistance model that had been in place before that, and really sustain assistance and provide a new safety net support system for our community around prevention. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, here are kind of the top level results for the last 5 years. And we're in our, we're almost halfway through our 6th year now, which is a little bit scary to think about. But for the first 5 years, we served nearly 4,500 households, over 12,000 people. Perhaps not surprisingly, but still critical for evaluating success. Nearly 96% of households stay housed while they're receiving assistance. But probably more importantly, at least in my mind, and thinking long-term about the impact that we're having, is that after a year, only 3.5% of households became homeless. So 96.5% of the households are still housed after a year. And we also see that over 90% of the households are still housed after 2 years. The one area that we always like to tell people, just to kind of open, just be transparent. We aren't able to see, unless, someone tells us, if folks have moved out of the area, for example. The average amount of assistance, direct, either rental or financial assistance provided to each household, is around 5,300. That has gone up significantly over the last year and a half, as the pandemic assistances have kind of stopped. But we have no limit on the amount of financial assistance. So again, going back to the flexibility, we do have checks and balances and different thresholds where we bring in additional perspectives and do a little bit more robust case conferencing. But we literally, as you can see there, we have a household that has received $31,000 of assistance, and there were some households during the pandemic that were even higher than that. But marrying that all out, all across, the 4,500 households, you still see the vast majority of average are right there in the middle, in the $2,000 to kind of $6,000 range, which, as Jessica mentioned before, is so much less than what we know it costs for a household to be homeless and provide services on the street. So the financial argument for preventing homelessness is pretty clear cut. Next slide, please, if there is one. So thanks. Finally, another component that has been in place since the very beginning is that we partnered with the University of Notre Dame's Lab for Economic Opportunity. So that kind of they have like a research institute within the university that does research trials, both like randomized control trials and evaluations, which this started out being an independent evaluation of the homelessness prevention system to find out if it works or not, right? And be able to publish those results in a research manner. So Leo established both a treatment group and a control group. So these were households that were eligible for services. We did not want to turn people away for the reasons of research. Luckily, we had a built-in treatment and control group in that we don't have enough money to help everyone who needs help. And so we had a group of people who received assistance, and then we had a group of people that would have been eligible for assistance, but we did not serve through the homelessness prevention system. Next slide, please. And after studying and evaluating the data for an extended period of time, basically from the beginning of operation in 2017 up until really March of 2020, where Leo told us that they really kind of started to see a change in the data, and that the assumption, the reasonable assumption that that was an impact from COVID. And so they decided to kind of stop the data collection at that point, because it's kind of presents a different picture. Overall, kind of high notes of success is that they are seeing decreased use of homeless services, decreased shelter entry, decreased use of services over time. So it's not just in the beginning, it's actually, over 1 and 2 years. The reason why the study took so long was because we had to wait. We had to wait for the families to go through the process of getting services, and then, exiting, and then hanging out and checking on them in the periodic, and then kind of looking at HMIS data after 2 years, and then really being able to make these kind of firm statements about the success of distributing financial assistance and the homelessness prevention system. And also, as I mentioned already, the last bullet there is that kind of a decreased impact of the financial assistance after COVID-19. And that is probably primarily because we also infused the system kind of on top of the homelessness prevention system with over $85 million of local and federal and state rental assistance during the COVID period. Next slide, please. So this is kind of just a different look at the key takeaways that will be eventually published by Leo, and are kind of the results of the study. But that emergency financial assistance does decrease the likelihood that a recipient will enter a homeless shelter, and really decreases the usage of homeless services at large in general. And that because of that, that they estimate that there's a cost benefit of $2 to $3 for every dollar spent on programs. So very clear cut, decreases the amount of people that become homeless and utilize services for homelessness services, and the kind of corresponding cost savings. And I think that might be it, but if there's another slide, next slide, please. All right, cool.
Thank you,
everyone.
Chad. Thank you for walking us through all of those successes. We wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about what other housing resources are available to folks in Santa Clara County. And for this reason, we wanted to really zoom in on coordinated entry. So that is because coordinated entry is the centralized way that folks access the vast majority of supportive housing programs. So to that end, coordinated entry supports access to both HUD funded, so both federally funded and county funded permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and transitional housing. So no matter what type of housing of these types folks are looking for, they get connected to it through coordinated entry. And the idea was that there wouldn't be a ton of different waiting lists for different programs, that there would just be one way that folks can access everything that's possibly available in the community. And so coordinated entry provides access to all of those different types of programs, and also to emergency shelter now with the Here For You hotline. So the entire process is meant to prioritize folks that are most in need of assistance. So similarly to what Chad was highlighting in terms of the prevention system, the supportive housing system works similarly in that the folks that are most in need are prioritized because there's not currently enough housing to meet the entire need of the unhoused population. And coordinated entry gives the community a sense of what are the unmet needs and where do we need to apply for additional resources. So a couple of things that coordinated entry doesn't do, as I've mentioned, the demand far outpaces the supply of supportive housing. So coordinated entry doesn't guarantee access to housing. And we'll go over some performance data about just how many folks are connected, but more on that in a little bit. And coordinated entry, the types of programs that it does exclude are Section 8. So folks don't get connected to Section 8 through coordinated entry. It also doesn't include low-income affordable housing complexes or other private housing complexes. So we're really talking about HUD and county-funded permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and transitional housing. That's what's available through coordinated entry. And it doesn't increase the supply of housing, and it also doesn't guarantee eligibility. So coordinated entry does its best to match folks with programs that they're probably eligible for, but depending on the funding streams that those programs have, there's an eligibility determination process. So in terms of the 100,000 foot overview of the system, the coordinated entry includes the Here For You Center that provides crisis response services, so housing problem solving, and connects folks to emergency shelter across the community. And then access points, so emergency shelters, outreach teams, other drop-in centers. They use a standardized assessment process. So I know Chad mentioned the ISPDAT. So they use that to gather info on folks' needs and preferences and barriers to housing. And then folks' assessment scores are used to prioritize for the various housing program types. And then folks are referred with those that score the highest on the assessment referred first. So now getting into a little more detail on all of those points, we have the front doors to coordinated entry on the left of this graphic. So folks can get assessed to be added to the coordinated entry queue at shelters. They can be assessed through outreach programs. They can be assessed through drop-in centers. At that point, they receive the ISPDAT assessment, and their information is entered into HMIS. And so from the data system, there are several community queues. So we don't call them waiting lists because they're not first come, first serve, but there's a queue of folks that score pretty high on the assessment. So the folks that get the highest scores, they are on the community queue for permanent supportive housing. So that long-term rental assistance and more intensive supportive services, because based on their assessment, they're estimated to have more barriers to housing. They're the least likely to self-resolve. They're likely to need more assistance to get permanent housing. So that's who's slotted for the PSHQ. And then folks who score kind of like in the middle range of the ISPDAT assessment, they all go into one centralized queue for rapid rehousing and transitional housing. And those program types, they provide shorter term support, right? They provide up to 2 years at most of rental assistance and supportive services. So these folks are estimated based on the assessment to have a higher likelihood of regaining housing stability through a lower level of support. So less intensive case management, shorter rental assistance time, and they go on the rapid rehousing queue. And then there are folks who score at the bottom of the SPDAT assessment that are referred to other services. So they don't go on a housing queue at all because based on the assessment, these are the folks that have the fewest barriers to regaining housing. They're the most likely to self-resolve without assistance. And until we have enough supportive housing to meet the need of everyone in the community, these folks are not prioritized for supportive housing resources. So now zooming into each bit of these processes. So we talked already about the Here For You call center, but folks can access emergency shelter, and folks who aren't eligible for homelessness prevention, maybe they didn't score high enough on the HCAT, maybe they're not eligible for another reason, those folks can receive housing problem solving through the Here For You call center. So the call center does those housing problem solving services, and then if they don't work, if they connect folks to emergency shelter, and it's operated by the Bill Wilson Center, and you can reach them at 408-385-2400. And then the coordinated entry access points. So shelter outreach services programs. These are the programs where folks can take the assessment to get on a housing queue. So there are over 50 of these access point agencies across Santa Clara County to make sure that it's as easy as possible for folks to get connected, right? So there are a number of agencies that are part of the DVAC, the Domestic Violence Advocacy Consortium. I know some of y'all might be working at an agency that's a coordinated entry access point as part of the EAN. There are certain benefits offices that do coordinated entry assessments. There are street outreach programs. There's the Valley Homeless Healthcare Program, school sites. Basically, there are a ton of different places that are kind of the first touch point that someone experiencing homelessness might go to that provide this assessment process to get folks on a housing queue. And there's some great resources on the county website. There's some FAQs, and we'll share these materials with active links so that y'all can access them. So they answer common questions like, what is the assessment? What can someone expect after they've taken a VSPDAT assessment? How likely are they to be referred? What should they do in the meantime? Questions like that. And there are also a number of subpopulation specific access points. So these are organizations that specialize in providing culturally responsive services to certain subpopulations of folks experiencing homelessness. So that includes the Bill Wilson Center that works with youth and young adults. It includes Asian Americans for Community Involvement, or AKI, that works with survivors of domestic violence. It includes Community Solutions, MyTree, Nextdoor, and the YWCA as well. And so there, in addition to all the general shelters and the outreach teams, these agencies provide specialized services for folks of different subpopulations and also support them to get connected to coordinated entry. So a little bit more on the VSPDAT assessment. So the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool, the worst acronym in our work, in my opinion. So this assessment tool is a self-report tool that the access points, so shelters, outreach, the subpopulation specific organizations that we just chatted about, they all administer the same assessment. So anyone who's looking for housing through coordinated entry goes through this assessment process, and they answer a series of questions. There's tailored versions, a version for single adults, one for families, one for young adults, and one for folks exiting institutions. And the goal of the assessment is to figure out which households are the most vulnerable, which households have the highest barriers to housing, to determine whether they'll go on the permanent supportive housing queue or the rapid rehousing queue, and whether they're going to be prioritized for those types of programs. And so to give you a little bit of a sense of the volume, since coordinated entry launched towards the end of 2015, there have been close to 32,000 households that have been assessed. So a vast majority of those have been individual adults, but there's also significant numbers of young adults and families with children. And in terms of referrals, so also since the beginning of coordinated entry in 2015, there's the 32,000 folks that have been assessed, right? And then of those, 3,600 roughly have received referrals to permanent supportive housing. So I think this really underscores the gap between the housing demand and the housing supply in the community. So also 8,300 folks have been referred to rapid rehousing. So there are more rapid rehousing resources, and because rapid rehousing is more time limited and folks stay in it for only up to 2 years, so those slots turn over, there are more opportunities for rapid rehousing in the community. And finally, a little bit more data on coordinated entry and how folks get connected to housing. So coordinated entry places about just over 160 households in permanent housing every single month. So folks are getting connected to rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, transitional housing all the time. There's people getting placed every single day, but an average of 264 households take the VI-SPDAT for the first time every month. So there's 100 more folks that take the assessment for the first time than the folks placed. And you can really see this in this graphic. So the demand for housing assistance really outpaces the supply. So it's really important for folks to keep pursuing other housing opportunities for assistance. And there's more and more programs added to coordinated entry all the time. There's the COC continues to create new housing opportunities. That's a major focus of the community plan, as Jessica talked about. But this sort of gives you an idea of the rest of the supportive housing system and how folks get connected to resources through coordinated entry. So we're gonna pause here, and I wanted to see if folks have any questions about this first piece of the training.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh,
I hear
just have one. Sorry, I just have one question. I know that you had mentioned that if people don't qualify through the HPAT for assistance, that we're able to do the Here For You hotline as a second resource. My question is how can they assist?
Sorry, your question was how can you assist in those situations? So folks can, oh no, how do I go back? So the hotline, folks can call the hotline, and then there's staff that can provide them with housing problem solving services, or if they're unable to tap into other networks or resources to support them to retain their housing through these housing problem solving services, then the hotline can connect them to an emergency shelter bed. So folks can call the hotline at this number to access those housing problem solving services and shelter connections.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to keep an eye out on the chat, but I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Carla for the next phase of our training.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Sasha and Jessica and Chad for this super comprehensive overview of the homeless response system in Santa Clara County. And thank you all so much for being here as well, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this training. We're going to shift our focus a little bit now to discuss cultural responsiveness in case management. Within the context of the homeless prevention system and the work that you all do every single day. So before I start the presentation and the discussion, I wanted to just acknowledge that this topic can be a tough one. And we, want to acknowledge that and pause to acknowledge that. And we really, because of that, we really ask that everyone leads with vulnerability, everybody speak using I statements, and really maintain respect for your colleagues that are on this call. We also invite you to bring your questions and your thoughts and participate as much as possible and as much as you feel comfortable doing so, so that this portion of the training can be very interactive. That's what we're sort of looking for here. So with that, let's begin. So next slide. So first, let's go over some of the data on whom the HPS served, specifically from July 2021 to June 2022. So these numbers, before I begin, these numbers are from a monthly report that the Office of Supportive Housing provides to the Board of Supervisors, Housing, Land Use, Environment, and Transportation Committee, and it's also known as the Hewlett Report for short. So first, we're going to look at the demographics of who the homeless prevention system served during this time. We're going to look at it by race. So 14% of the households served by the homeless prevention system during the time period of this July 2021 to June 2022 identified as Black, African American, or African. 6% identified as Asian or Asian American. 3% identified as American Indian, Alaska Native, or Indigenous. 2% identified as multiracial. 1% identified as Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and then 53% identified as white. Now, of the heads of household that identified as white, so of those 53%, 77% of those identified their ethnicity as Hispanic or Latinx. So the ability to see how race and ethnicity overlap with one another is really notable here, especially for the conversation that we're going to have today about acknowledging our own assumptions and biases, right? Next slide, please. So just to continue the demographic data, of all the households that were served by the homeless prevention system during this time period, 63% identified as Hispanic or Latinx, 32% identified as non-Hispanic and Latinx. And then in terms of the types of households that were served, half were households with children, 38% were single adults, and then 12% were households without children. Next slide. So then on this slide, we're looking at the data by age. So a small portion, 4% of the clients served were 18 to 24 years of age, 24% were between 25 and 34 years old, 28% were between 35 to 44 years of age, 22% were 45 to 54 years of age, 14% were 55 to 64, and then 8% were 65 or above. Next slide. So when we look at the data broken down by gender, the majority, 73%, identified as female, 25% identified as male, 0.1% identified as a gender other than female or male, so non-binary, gender fluid, agender, or a culturally specific gender, and then 0.1% identified as transgender. So I know I went through these numbers really quickly to kind of start us off, but mainly we wanted to just use these numbers to show you what you already know about your work. And that is that you as case managers and the homelessness prevention system as a whole serves households with very diverse lived experiences and cultural backgrounds, right? And folks have all of these intersecting identities. And so we wanted to sort of acknowledge that. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts about the data before we go ahead and transition to talking about implicit bias? Okay, next slide. And feel free to pop your questions in the chat as well. So to start off our discussion about implicit bias, we're going to go ahead and play a short clip. It's called Peanut Butter, Jelly, and Racism, and it's a great overview of implicit bias and what it is, when we may have seen it, and some strategies. So go ahead and play. I don't think we can hear it, Sasha. Is it playing on your end? I think you have to unmute yourself possibly, but.
You have to reshare your screen, but optimize for audio and video.
Oh, there we go. Share sound.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went.
Can you hear it now?
Somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes the shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there is an overrepresentation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't
implicit bias
that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. You might be falling prey to. One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's the scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
Thanks, Sasha. So just to sum it up, implicit bias is made up of the attitudes and stereotypes that really affect our understanding, our actions, and our decisions in an unconscious manner, right? And like the video really drives home, it's a universal human condition that we all have. And so acknowledging that is really important. Next slide.
Let's look at how to measure bias in our.
Perfect. Next slide. I think I already did this one. So question, do I have implicit bias? Yes, absolutely. So we all have implicit biases, right? Like I just mentioned, a really great way for you to detect your implicit bias is to take the test the Harvard Implicit Association test. It's a research-backed self-assessment that is based on questions that sort of force you to make a quick association with certain words and characteristics. And at the end, it provides you with a really comprehensive sort of result of the biases that your responses show. It's just a really great kind of starting point for folks. So like Sasha said, we're going to send out these training materials and everything will be linked. So the link to that test will be on there if you're interested. It's important to note that our implicit biases that we hold often don't align with our declared beliefs. And often when we face our biases, we often disagree with them, right? And we have the ability and must check our own implicit biases. Gathering the knowledge about yourself is a great place to start and something that doesn't necessarily have to involve other people. Next slide. All right. So why are we talking about implicit bias? Because implicit bias impacts the ways that you interact with the clients and the households that you work with as a case manager, right? It impacts the plans and the conversations you have with your clients. So we're going to take a moment to pause here and to reflect on the question that you see on the slide. Can you talk about a moment when you realized that you had a bias toward a client? And I want to note that here, you don't need to talk about the impact of the bias or how the whole situation sort of developed from there. We're really just looking for you to self-reflect on a moment when maybe you realized that you had made an assumption about a client due to their background, their demographic, or their identity. We do encourage folks to unmute themselves and share, but also if you'd like to share in the chat, that's totally fine as well. And we're hoping that, this self-reflection can kind of begin our discussions going forward. I wanted to start off to sort of lead with vulnerability and start off with a moment that I had experienced in my work. So Homebase is involved in a lot of different groups and helping to facilitate, conversations and groups in different communities all across the country. I was involved in a project that included a person with lived experience of homelessness who had previously had some tech issues and tech challenges and being able to access Zoom and other sort of ways that we were using to facilitate meetings. And so I made this assumption that because this person had had tech challenges in the past, that they needed me to call them before every community meeting where we were going to be on Zoom, to help them get on Zoom. And interestingly enough, after a few times of calling this person right before the meeting to make sure that they were okay getting on Zoom, this person finally told me, hey, I feel like you made an assumption that I need this help. I need you to call me every single time before the meeting. And they told me that it made them feel stupid because I was sort of pushing my help on them, right? And so in that moment, I realized, wow, I really did make an assumption about this person, that they needed my help. And also I made an assumption about the level of support they needed. I didn't ask this person, do you need help? Okay, you do. What can I do to support you? And that was likely due to many different factors, including this person's age. I sort of assumed that they didn't know how to use technology. Does anybody feel comfortable sort of sharing maybe a similar moment where you realized that you had a bias or had made an assumption about a client in your work?
I can share one. Oh, go ahead.
You sure?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So hello, my name is Mylin. I'm with ICANN. And when we were working in the HPS, especially with HPS CV, when I was doing one of my case management, we encountered this client who we're trying to help, and we're trying to get connected to the landlord, and the client tells me, don't connect me with, don't talk to the landlord. They're going to evict me. They're greedy. They're nasty. They're bad people. So I was definitely gain bias from all that, but because of my job, I had to connect to the landlord anyway. But when I spoke to the landlord, I realized they were good people. They didn't know the law, like some of our some of our clients do. Our clients were ignorant in the law. We're helping them, and I realized that some of the landlord, they were trying to do what's best, trying to do what's good for them. They don't want to lose out. But when I talk to them and I explain the law to them, the resources to them, so that they don't make assumption, so that they're more willing to take on the client. But once they understood that, they're more than helpful, more than being cooperative. So I realized that I already had a bias coming in talking to the landlord because of what was perceived from my client. But once I spoke to them, they were very open once we've given them more knowledge, explaining the options to them.
Thank you so much for sharing, Mylin. I think that's a powerful example for you all too, because you all obviously do interface with landlords and other folks other than your clients, right? And so there are definitely places where assumptions can be made there as well. Would anyone else like to share a moment?
I can share something. This is Erin from Sacred Heart. A moment that stood out to me in being aware of my own assumptions was a few years ago doing assessments for HPS. And you know how it is, it's really busy. You're trying to screen a lot of people. You're moving really fast and trying to be as quick as possible. And one day it really stood out to me that perhaps my biases and my assumptions were making me almost start to think I knew the answer before I talked to someone. And I realized this when someone walked in and I sat down with him. And in my head, I thought this person's not going to qualify for HPS. And I fortunately had to do an assessment. So I had to ask him some questions and learn more about him. And then it turned out that his situation was completely different than I thought. And he scored very high on the assessment and more than qualified for HPS. And it made me reflect, why did I think that when I sat down with this person? And reflecting on it, this was someone who was white, who was male, who was around 30 years old, not too young, not too old, had a pretty recent looking haircut, clean clothes, looked kind of put together, had told me that he had been in the military, that he had an education, and all of these factors in my head, I made an assumption about who he was. And it turned out that his situation was very different than my assumptions led me to initially believe. And that taught me to really think about, am I making those snap judgments with everyone who walks in, and are they impacting how I approach a screening or an assessment or another interaction with them?
Thank you, Erin. Does anybody else have anything, any moments they'd like to share? Lead with vulnerability. We've got a quiet group today. Okay. Well, thank you for the folks that did share their sort of moments.
I have one.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. That's wonderful.
Sorry, I just realized that. Here, let me show my face. Okay. So I had an opposite of Erin, which was very similar in the sense, but the opposite. The client came in and I thought they were going to be eligible. They were shaky, they were crying, they were distraught, but they didn't qualify at following our assessment. And so that I did feel, I felt terrible, but they didn't qualify. And I think what caught my attention was more of the emotional part, that I figured, you know what, they're going to qualify. I could see that there's a lot going on here. Let's begin this assessment. Let's see, what comes out of this. And so, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that can be a difficult situation, right? To have to tell a client that they don't qualify for that assistance. And that's something that we're hoping to sort of cover at our part 2 of this training next week. So that'll be some good conversation. Have any other folks experienced similar situations where you assumed that a client would or would not have qualified for the assistance, and then they did or did not, and it surprised you, or any other assumptions that you've made about clients?
Yeah, I can just say, Carla, your example actually resonated with me, and kind of like my assumptions of helplessness sometimes. I mean, we deal sometimes with people who really need very basic instruction, and then people come into us in these dire situations, and sometimes I find myself thinking that it's a result of them not having done basic things, and maybe oversimplifying things, and then they'll say, well, no, of course I've already done a bunch of stuff. So just kind of treating people, assuming their competence level, I guess. I find myself sometimes thinking, these people are in it because they don't know how to handle things, or, sometimes it's just completely out of their control, and they are completely aware and self-sufficient, but they really have circumstances beyond their control they're facing.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Catherine. And I think everybody here has, wants to help folks and make a difference in people's lives. And sometimes I think that can cause us to make certain assumptions for us to sort of, problem solve as quickly as possible for folks, right? Without maybe taking the time and the moment to just reflect on what does this person actually need, and how can I best support them but still empower them, right, to go about it in their own way and how they would like to go about it. So appreciate that example. Anyone else? I know that there's more. I know there's a lot of people that are thinking of some moments right now. All right. Well, if for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and continue. But if folks do think of anything, please pop them in the chat. I really think that the more that folks are involved in discussion, I think the more rich our discussion will be today in the training. And this is meant to be really interactive. And, if folks feel more comfortable popping it in the chat, that's okay too. But yeah. We'll go ahead and continue. Thank you for everyone who shared and for folks who are really thinking about this. So now that we've sort of determined that we all have implicit biases and we've kind of learned what that is, right? And maybe you already knew what this was, but this is sort of just reminding everyone that everybody has implicit biases. Can anything be done about this, right? And if so, what can we do? Where do we begin? So we have some strategies up here. And this is by no means like a comprehensive list of strategies. And there's a lot of work that can be done at the individual level, at the organizational level, at the systems level, right, to combat implicit biases. But we wanted to talk about these sort of big ones that we have been able to research or to find through our research and share these with you. So first, build your self-knowledge. So as I've mentioned a few times already, it's incredibly important and critical that you build your own self-knowledge, right? Culturally responsive case managers and helping professionals in general are aware of their own cultural groups and of their values, their assumptions, and their biases regarding other cultural groups. And striving to understand how these factors affect your ability to provide culturally effective services to clients is extremely important, right? Because you may be able to self-reflect on that, but it is impacting other folks. Next, acknowledge your assumptions. So we will all make assumptions. It's kind of the way that our brains are wired. We learn patterns and then we kind of pick up on that and make assumptions based on that. But it is our individual responsibility to realize when we have made an assumption and then to seek out more information so that we don't necessarily act on our assumptions, but rather we act on the facts, the data, and what is important to the client and their household, right, in this context. Which then leads us to our next strategy, which is to ask questions. Ask clarifying questions to your client. Find out what's important to them and to their household. And so I know Catherine mentioned the example of the assessment, and so did Aaron. So we're talking, I guess, about at this point, the phase in which you've already determined that your client is actually going to be eligible to receive these services, and what clarifying questions are you asking them to determine how the household would like to go about achieving housing stability, right? And so how does the client see their presenting problem? What are the barriers that are getting in the way of them meeting their case management goals? So asking questions is really critical. Next is building your empathy. Seek to understand others that are different than you, spend more time with people that are different than you, learn about different lived experiences and cultural backgrounds. This one kind of goes beyond the workplace, but is a really important piece of the strategies to reduce implicit biases and its impact. And then lastly, seek feedback. Talk to fellow case managers, talk to your supervisors, ask clients if it's okay for you to ask questions about certain parts of their lives. Ask clients for feedback. Those are all very important strategies. Next slide, please. So here's some just resources for you all to explore. Like I said, we're going to be providing a PDF copy of the slide deck, and these links will all be live and will be included. Like I said, I highly recommend the Harvard Implicit Association test. And then some of these other links are really fascinating and important, and we just couldn't fit everything in here. So highly recommend you taking a look at these. Next slide. So now that we've discussed implicit bias, let's discuss what cultural responsiveness, actually looks like. So cultural responsiveness is the awareness and acknowledgement that people from other cultural groups don't necessarily share the same beliefs and practices or perceive, interpret, or encounter similar experiences in the same way that you do. And part of this understanding, and I really want to emphasize this, is to also recognize that even people from the same cultural groups will not always share the same beliefs, the same practices, or experience similar situations in the same way, because people in the same cultural groups are not monoliths. And people have other intersecting identities and life experiences that have also shaped them, right? So people are complex, essentially, which is something I think, working with people a lot, we all already know. Cultural responsiveness is rooted in respect, validation, and openness towards someone whose social and cultural background is different from one's own. Next slide. Perfect. So here we have a scenario. I'm going to go ahead and read it to you all, and then kind of ask you to talk about your ideas to approaching this case in a culturally responsive way. This is going to be like a very discussion-based scenario. So please, provide your thoughts either in the chat or by unmuting yourself. So the scenario is this. So Carla and Max are two adults living in a household. Only Carla is able to legally work in the US. Max works under the table as a dishwasher at a local restaurant, but he's currently not getting enough hours or income to support the household, and he's struggling to find additional work due to his immigration status. Now, Carla has a newborn. And so one solution that maybe you've thought of as their case manager or that has come up is for Max to provide childcare while Carla goes to work. However, both Carla and Max have told you that they see childcare as being a woman's role. What would be a culturally responsive way that you would approach this case? And please feel free to, you don't have to share your whole plan or anything like that, but just any thoughts or approaches that you might use if this were a real case that you were dealing with. And please feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself.
I think coming from a place of curiosity, right? Asking some questions, like, I would like to know a little more, like, can you tell me a little more, right? As part of the roles. Another question could be, what other concerns do you have? Or, how do your values and beliefs shape your decisions? Just trying to find a little more. And I think once people start talking, you're able to get more information, right? And then try to find more solutions, hopefully.
Thank you, Marita. So yeah, asking questions and I like the word curiosity, having curiosity for the household and their values and finding out what's important to them and maybe what are the barriers that are, preventing this from having happened already if this was an idea you came up with as a case manager. Anyone else? Has anyone ever experienced a similar scenario where maybe
we have one, Carla, Brittany and I.
Okay.
So something that we might try to do based on the level of relationship we have with the family, like how much time we've spent with them, is pointing out that while like culturally and traditionally, those are very clear roles based on the fact that they're in a new environment right now and they're bound by rules and regulations that they have no control over based on the immigration status, that they might need to be creative temporarily. Since Carla has the legal ability to work, it's not really dependent on their morals or values alone, because there's rules that are preventing them to fulfilling their cultural quote unquote responsibilities, and just see how they feel about that. Maybe seeing it from a different perspective of like, it's not that she like that, like it's not that he's taking care of the baby because, you know, that's man's work or woman's work, but it's because they're in a situation because they wanted a better life, and the rules make it so that that's the only way they can accomplish their long-term goal.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I appreciated that you said depends on the relationship you have with and the rapport that you have with the client. And that's huge, right? Because depending on how long you've been interacting with the household, that could really change the approach that you take in the conversation that you can have with the client and the household. So thank you. It looks like Nicolette also said in the chat, I would discuss the long-term stability plan and goals for the family and how they can reach them. That may help them see what beliefs are holding them from being self-sufficient. So I guess like starting from like, what are your goals? And then what are the action steps that we can, you know, use to address this, you know, little step by little step. So thank you for that. Anyone else have any thoughts on how they would approach this case?
Well, I'd like to share something. My name's Maura with Housing Choices. Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to, I mean, if that's how they feel culturally, I would do my best to kind of like see, well, okay, well, what solution, asking them like, well, what solutions do you guys have? How do you guys think that, you know, you guys can, because ultimately like the goal is this, you know, like we need you guys, you know, to be financial, you know, like the goal of for everybody, I'm sure including yourselves, is, you know, to get financially stable. So considering the situation and the circumstances, you know, how can I help you guys, you know, reach that goal, you know, according to your guys's beliefs, you know, because I mean, it's not like I could sit there and say all day, you know, what is, you know, according to the American standards, what's, you know, seems to me like the best idea, but ultimately it's going to be their choice, you know. So, you know, what type of, you know, maybe helping them find a job, or even like leading and guiding them so he could, you know, become legal, you know, or, you know, maybe they could get married and get him papers, or, you know, something like that ultimately, you know, fits their needs, but also the end goal as well.
Thank you, Mara. Anyone else have any other thoughts?
Just from an HPS perspective, I want to kind of emphasize some of the things that were brought up about we're really looking for the solution that works for the household. And sometimes it's really easy for us in our job to think we see a really clear solution and really want to make it happen because we really want the best for the household and we really think it's going to be what's best for them. But it's probably not what's best for them if they don't think it's best for them. And really being open to whatever the solution is. Maybe there is a solution where Max is able to work more. Maybe they'd prefer to look for cheaper housing or find a roommate rather than trying to increase income. maybe there's an opportunity to, partner up with family members for shared childcare that allows both Carla and Max to work. There may be many other solutions. And so I think that from an HPS perspective, we really want to look for the solution that works for the household and be open to what's right for them. And the only way that we're going to find that out is what everyone else was talking about. It's building that relationship, being curious, being open, asking questions, and being able to facilitate what the household wants to do, as opposed to telling them what we think they should do.
Thank you, Erin. Myra said, maybe help explore other options, such as a friend, a family member, or a neighbor that could help or assist, maybe temporarily with cost or low cost, and other childcare resources for low-income folks as well. Holly, did you want to share something, or did you unmute by accident?
No, I did. I have a couple of different thoughts. I mean, I think kind of continuing off of Erin's point, I think there are definitely some solutions here that might honor like what the family may want. I mean, the dishwasher is one opportunity, but there are a lot of organizations that will work with individuals who don't currently have legal status. And we have a lot of people that we can reach out to if legal status is an issue, like Catholic Charities and those kind of groups can help with that sort of thing, if that's on the table. And then also if the mom does have like Medi-Cal, there are a lot of childcare programs that may be available. So if she is interested and willing in picking up work, and maybe like if you have CalWorks, you can, if you are working, you can get childcare during the hours that you're working. So maybe trying to utilize some of the solutions that we do know are available. And I mean, of course, like as many other people said, maybe just asking questions and seeing if there is a way to, I don't know, create a dialogue about the family dynamic and if they want to explore a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, ultimately from a like motivational interviewing standpoint, letting people know that what they think is best for them is right is always a good thing, because they're more likely to stick with it for a long period of time. So hopefully finding creative solutions is a way to approach that, and just trying to let the family be who they are.
Thank you, Holly. And that's exactly what I was going to say. It's folks are coming up with really creative solutions that kind of meet the household where they are, right? If that's something that's important to them. And then we have Emily in the chat said, depending on other contexts they give, possibly just doing my best to respect that, or offering to work towards solution in which Carla does the majority, but not all the childcare, while assisting with the steps needed to have Max be able to work legally. So Emily's point about context is important here too, right? So this is like a fake scenario or hypothetical scenario that has very limited context. And so there are a lot of other factors as well. It looks like Mylin has her hand up. I think you're still muted, Mylin.
Sorry about that. One of the guidelines that we use in terms of approaching in a culturally responsive way is go by the philosophy that our client knows the situation best. So when we come in, the first thing we do is we zip our mouth, we open our ears and pretty much open our heart. And we say, then we just say, hey, what's going on? You tell us. And we would ask leading questions like, so how do you feel? And have them to pretty much open up and giving us ideas of what's going on behind the scenes, what they are not telling us. And we will not jump to any solution giving. because we don't understand the data, we don't understand what's going on, the dynamics between the two, the undercurrents, to provide any sort of solutions. The other guideline that we follow by is if we provide them the solution, they're not going to go for it. They will need to provide their own solutions. We sit down once they were able to, once that they know that we're listening, we're not making judgment, then they will offer solutions. And then we will ask both of them, what do they think? Are those viable for them? If not, are they open to other solutions, to other options? Have they thought of other options? And then they invite us to come in and provide the solution, then we jump in.
Thank you, Mylin. Do any other folks have anything to add? All right. Oh, well, thank you to everyone who sort of shared their perspective on this scenario. We'll go ahead and move on to our panel now, because we want to give enough time for this discussion and give folks the space to ask questions. And so if we could move on to the next slide. Perfect. So we've got a great panel lined up for you all today. So both folks that serve within the HPS, and then also folks outside of the HPS, but that are serve folks in a culturally responsive way. Wanted to get their perspectives for them to share with you. So how we'll do it is we have a set of questions that we're going to be, that I'll be asking the panel, and we'll have folks sort of answer. I think what we'll do is I'll pose the question to the entire panel, and if panelists have thoughts, please go ahead and share the thoughts with the attendees. And then at the end of the panel discussion, we'll go ahead and open it up for folks to ask other questions. But we will, encourage folks the training attendees to come off mute and, ask questions as they come up as well, and engage in conversation. So really want this to be interactive and for you all to get what you need out of it. And so please feel free to ask questions and everything like that. So I will just kind of acknowledge the panel that we have here. So we have Marita, Family Assistance Manager from Sacred Heart Community Service. We have Vanessa and Brittany from Carry the Vision. We have Mylin from ICANN. And then we have Isabella and I think Emmett from Q Corner. So thank you all for being here and for being willing to share, your approach to cultural responsiveness with the training attendees. If you could move on to the next slide. So for the panelists, please feel free to answer by just coming off of mute. What communities do your agencies serve? If anyone would like to get started, I guess I can call on folks. So I'll have Marita go first.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. At Sacred Heart, like my first thought was like, well, everybody. But we do serve all of Santa Clara County. We serve a diverse population. It seems we have higher percentage of Latinx and Asian IPA community members, but I think that's because we're in downtown, just for our location. And just program-wise, we kind of already reviewed it, right? Individuals that are at risk of losing their housing, right? Or families that are between 30 and 80% AMI. But everyone is welcome.
Thank you, Marita. Mylin, did you want to share what communities your agency serves?
Sure. I'm not sure if everybody's aware. ICANN started out by 3 Vietnamese refugees. Our original focus was to raise funds to do humanitarian program, education program, to help Vietnamese in Vietnam. We also help in other countries also. And then later on, we start focusing on immigrants, newly arrived immigrants that needs to adjust or acclimate to the new culture here in the Bay Area. So to make long story short, we primarily serve the Vietnamese low-income community. We also serve the API, Asian American Pacific Islanders, and we also serve the English-speaking Hispanics, African. Like everybody's welcome, but the majority of our clients are primarily Vietnamese speaking who are non-English speakers.
Thank you, Mylin. Isabella or Isa, could you share who Q Corner serves?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. Isa or Isabella Garcia. My pronouns are they and she, and I'm the management analyst for the Q Corner. So the Q Corner is a peer-run, peer-driven program through the County of Santa Clara. So we're within the county behavioral health system, and we serve LGBTQI plus community members. So yeah, of all ages. We have support groups that are 18 plus, but our services are free of charge and open to everyone. We have a drop-in space, we have peer support, and we do trainings, technical assistance, and a lot of that. So we do some support directly for community and some support for folks that support the community. So clinicians, therapists, social workers. Yeah, and I'm sure we can dive in deeper to some of the other pieces as well if needed.
Thank you so much, Isa. Vanessa and Brittany from Carry the Vision. What communities does your agency serve?
Hi, so we currently predominantly, Brittany and I work with justice system involved or people and families experiencing homelessness or recently experienced homelessness. Prior to this program, Brittany worked exclusively on the emergency rent assistance program during COVID. But since that ended for Carry the Vision, we've moved on to our California Reinvestment Grant, and then we worked on destination homes heading home. The majority of the population that we serve varies by race. There's not like a specific race or age. But the commonality that we see the most in our work is justice system involvement or previous foster care placement.
Thank you so much. And so given, you know, the communities that you all serve, how does your agency or how do you approach cultural responsiveness when you're serving these households or these clients? If Mylin wants to get started.
All right. So I kind of gave away a little bit of that when I was answering this scenario. There's a certain guidelines that we go by. And the first one is our number one principle is the client knows their situation best. So we don't judge. We don't offer solutions because we're just walking in here. We don't know what's going on. The first thing we do is active listening. We try not to interrupt when they're talking, and we try to be very engaging with our eyes, our postures, encourage them to talk more and ask less questions. We only ask questions whenever they find that they cannot continue the train of thoughts. And sometimes when we do talk to them and they see that we are empathetic, have a listening ear, or we're respectful to what they're saying without judgment, they break down and cry. After that burst of emotion of knowing, oh my gosh, somebody's actually listening to me without criticizing, then they start thinking much better. Once their heart is relieved, they're able to think again. They just needed somebody to listen. So whenever we can break through that barrier of them breaking down and crying, we realize we have made a connection, that there is trust now. So now they can open up to us and talk to us and really tell us what's going on, what's holding them back. And then we start probing for more questions like, you know, what have you thought of this? What have you thought about? Have you thought about this? And then we try to be humble, not coming with the attitude that, hey, we're experienced, we're professional, we know what's going on. We always ask about what do they think first. And for a lot of them, that is something that they don't get every day. And to be able to ask for their opinion first and listening to them without interrupting or criticizing them or giving them solutions, they don't experience that often. So they felt very valued. And then we always tell that, you don't know what's going on. They are the best solution maker for themselves. They probably know what the solution is, but they haven't felt that they have enough confidence in themselves to trust the solution. But once you're able to make that human connection, once you're able to give them the feeling of pride that their words is heard, that their voice matters, somebody's listening to them without interrupting them, without giving them advice, they start to realize that, hey, maybe the options I'm thinking in my mind might be worth it to voice and share after all.
Thank you so much, Mylin. Do any of the other panelists want to go next? How does your agency approach cultural responsiveness when you're serving your clients?
Brittany's gonna share.
Hi. So from my experience, what works best is speaking their language. It makes them feel more comfortable. I've also noticed that the less staff, the better. Building trust, so avoiding assumptions or judgment. And getting to know them, talking to them first, just like Min said. Don't interrupt them.
Thank you so much. Anybody else?
Just fascinating to what it's been said, right? Just listening to folks, right? Because it's their story. Valuing and validating those experiences. In Sacred Heart, we're big believers that the community knows best. We even have a summit with that title. As an agency, we have conversations about inclusivity, racism, and privilege. So having that knowledge, right, as case managers, having that job, we hold a lot of power. So just kind of recognizing that privilege, being aware of the power, right, and how do I come in with my clients, right? So just kind of like doing the wave, shifting that power, right? And recognizing the power in my members, right? What are their strengths? Yeah, just.
Thank you, Marita. Isa?
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends on your definition of cultural responsiveness. I think there's like different understandings and different definitions kind of floating around. But I know for us, we made sure, in building out our staffing, that we have a Spanish-speaking peer support worker. So we hired somebody who's a Spanish-speaking peer support worker whose role is to support. So we are primarily peer support workers. That's kind of how our program started, was with 2 peer support workers. So folks who have had experience with the, with the system, folks who are part of community. So folks who really understand and can support and can listen. We also are making an effort to, even though we don't have any staff right now currently who speak Vietnamese or languages outside of English and Spanish, we contracted. So we brought in somebody who has fluency in Vietnamese, as well as the cultural experience around like gender and gendered language, so that we have the, that intersectional piece of the LGBTQ plus cultural kind of competency there, as well as that language kind of like competency, because that's really important to have both so that we're not stigmatizing kind of one way or the other. So those are some ways that we've tried to do that. We also know that like when working with families or households, that there can be different values, different beliefs, and that could cause barriers. So we do a lot of work with Dr. Caitlin Ryan from San Francisco State, who founded the Family Acceptance Project research and training. So we offer that training, I would say about every other month. And we also, so that supports and kind of talks through like how to support families. And then there's one more thing I was going to mention and I am blanking on it. We do a monthly SOGI 101. So even in that 101 training, we include a lot of like intersectionality, so that folks are aware, right, that like even in this kind of even in LGBTQ work or support, there's going to be different intersections, right? So some folks that are facing barriers in different ways. So we have a lot of clients coming in looking for support when it comes to housing, or some folks who come in and have lost housing and maybe family support. So that's really important to us to support folks in kind of all of those areas. But yeah, I'll kind of close off there.
Thanks so much, Isa. And that actually made me think of something. Marita, could you share within the HPS context about the translation services that are available when folks do, encounter a household that maybe doesn't speak, that is a monolingual, non-English speaker?
Absolutely. We definitely use interpreter services. So through Language Line, I know a lot of case managers that perhaps do not speak the language. We rely heavily on Google Translate. We check in with our other case managers. Hey, how does this sound? Hey, can you come with me, right, to do some translation, to do some interpretation? So just kind of helping each other out. And again, sometimes, right, we don't have the forms in the language. So again, doing our best with Google Translate and coworkers.
Thank you. And so for the sake of time, it looks like we only have 10 minutes left. I'm going to go ahead and skip to this question. Can you provide a real life scenario of a culturally responsive case management, right? And so in a way that, obviously doesn't mention any clients' names or anything, but would really be helpful, I think, for folks to hear about a scenario that and how you went about it in a culturally responsive way, for anybody who would like to jump in, for any of the panelists.
I had thought of one when I used to case manage this a long time ago. I call myself a party Catholic, right? That's the only time I go to church. And I had this client who was very religious, right? Her faith was really strong. And I would tell, hey, so-and-so, right? Like, we got to do this. We got to fill out this form. This needs to get done. And she would tell me, God's going to help me and God's going to figure it out, right? And I'll be like, okay. I'd be stressing, not gonna lie, right? And I'd be thinking, God is busy, right? Like, there's some things that we need to do. But I let it be. And, funny enough, things would work out, right? Like either friends to her church would help her out, or things, again, just kind of managed to work themselves out. So I think it was at that moment where I learned, I'm like, okay, I got to step back, right? Kind of like we've said earlier, clients know best. They're the experts of their own situation. And we're just here to support. And I was thinking of Brene Brown, right? That she talks about walking in someone's shoes and how we have to rethink that, right? Because we can't walk in their shoes, right? We don't know their experiences. We don't know what people have been through. So the whole idea is that we walk alongside them and, leave that door open whenever folks are ready. And I'm like, I'm here to catch you. I'm here to do whatever you need.
Thank you for that. Any other panelists want to jump in on this one?
Okay, I'll jump in. All right. As I said, we primarily serve the non-English speaking Vietnamese. Let me give you a little bit background on our Vietnamese population. You've heard about the model minority, right? Asians, strive for success, but they don't realize that not all Asians are equal. The Vietnamese population are here because they're political refugees. As a result, you get a swath of everybody from different backgrounds. Unlike other Asians, where they come here for work visa or universities where they're higher educated. So when we're dealing with the Vietnamese population, we're talking about people who are from the countryside, who are illiterate, who doesn't have educational background, and then coming to America is a huge adjustment. They never had the foundation in their country, and then come here with technology and stuff, it's overwhelming. It's like Mount Everest for them. So in this one, a lot of them also came over here with a lot of baggage. They live in a country that is communism, right? You hear how Vietnam is now expanding like China. Economically, it looks like a capitalistic society, but politically, it's like Cuba. It's still a dictatorship. It's still communism. There's no rights. So when we talk to our clients who just recently come from Vietnam, they come from a sense of oppression. There's no individual rights. There's no law. The government law enforcers are your enemies. They don't help you. If they want to talk to you, it's either they want to confiscate your belongings, or they want to put you to jail, or they're finding a pretext, a context to put you to jail, so they take your belongings and they're making things up. So in order to keep what you have to bribe them. So that's the context. So now they come over here to America and they're afraid of being evicted. Do you think they're going to go to law enforcers? No. Do you think that they think that the government is on their side to help them without these resources? It's too good to be true. So they're not used to this. So we come to them, we say, hey, we're here from the government. As soon as we say the word government, everything shuts down. Okay, we're here to help you. They don't believe this. They hear that all the time in that pretext, and they're sent to re-education camp, and and all these other goodies stuff that they've experienced. So there's a lot of emotional negative baggage they come with it. So for us to deal with it, we have to educate them and say to them, hey, this is America. You risk your life coming over here for reasons. Your rights are protected, and these laws are protecting you from being evicted. And so you need to talk to us. And then because we speak the same language, it's easier for them to open up. A lot of them come here overstay visa. So they're also undocumented. So they're afraid of or even if they're here, they're applying for a green card, and they don't want to become a public charge. To become a public charge, that means if you are taking a lot of public grants, assistance, and it goes in your file, they're less likely to grant you permanent stay because it's like, hey, you're become a liability and so forth. So we have to introduce them to the law lines, tell them, hey, that's not going to affect you, so forth. So that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is a lot of them, because they don't speak English, they tend to find landlords that are also Vietnamese. So these landlords also, even though they've been here longer, they have the houses, a lot of them scrape and save to have a house, to have a steady stream of income. And they don't understand the law either. So we have to go and explain to them, hey, you cannot just charge them on cash, and you cannot just evict them like that. You're just going to be losing money. But if you participate in our program, you're going to be able to have some money coming in. It's going to pay you this way and that. And it's like, oh, we don't have a lease. Most of them don't get lease. So we have to give them a lease, walk them through that. So by going through all this, we learned that we have to educate both sides of the equation, the tenants who are afraid of filling out forms, providing their information. They don't know how it's going to be used. And on the other end, the landlord also, who has the same stigma, who has the same fear. So in that sense, we apply the same guidelines, but a lot of the time we try to educate them and soothe their fear that, what they've experienced before in their homeland is no longer here. They're in a safe environment. So we just probably the biggest thing we do is let them feel that they're safe.
Thank you, Mylin. It seems like a big theme today has been establishing trust and creating a space for folks to feel safe. is extremely important for cultural responsiveness, right? In no matter what population that you're working with. So greatly appreciate you guys sharing. It seems like, unfortunately, we're running out of time. We have 1 minute left. I know folks didn't get the chance to ask questions, but I think you all have, all the training attendees should have home bases information. And if not, I can actually go ahead and share my email in the chat. If you have any questions that came up for you during today's training, please go ahead and send them to me, and I'm happy to get responses for you from the panelists and facilitate that communication. Also, please take our feedback survey. This is the first time that we're doing a training like this for case managers in the homeless prevention system, and we hope to continue to improve these trainings and really get you all the content that you need and want. And so it would be super helpful if you filled it out, and we appreciate your honesty and candid feedback on that. So thank you so much.